just maybe start at a very basic level, which is there's so many different terms being thrown around in the space. And I would just love to understand one that you do dive into in your book, which is the difference between sustainability and ESG, because I think we're often conflating the two. And I would love to know your approach to that
Great
differentiation.
question, Lauren, because this is one of those questions that we also try to address in many of our sessions with executives, because we have come at a time where ESG has become the buzzword for almost everything to collapse almost all sustainability activities under one umbrella. So the chief sustainability officer suddenly becomes also head of ESG and so on. And I think it created more confusion than it added value. And I think when we talk about the differentiation, one thing that is very important is that ESG has never been put in place to talk about the impact an organization has on planet or society, right? So this is oftentimes we think that ESG is about doing good, when in reality, ESG was a concept that came from the investor world. And this was all about how do ESG issues, so environmental, social, and governance issues, potentially affect the financial value of the firms that we're investing in. Okay? So very much this difference between inside out and outside in. ESG is all about how do these issues potentially affect our value, our financial value, and it's a risk management framework. And I think it's a very important one, and it's a very valid one. And as a business leader, you want to understand what are those risks. And we see that with increasing climate weather events, we see that with increasing, let's say, DEI issues and so on, that these topics become business relevant. And as a business leader or as an investor, you want to understand how well am I prepared to kind of address these issues. And for that reason, I think ESG is very valid. I think what the problem and the shortcoming is that we see nowadays is that we tend to equate it. And this is where a lot of this feeling that everything around sustainability and ESG is just greenwashing comes from. Because if you look at your ESG portfolio and you have tobacco firms in there and you have the big oil and gas companies in there, actually ExxonMobil is one of the top ESG performers. You may at least wonder, how is it possible that one of the companies that contribute a lot to the problems that we're seeing is now on top of the list of ESG performing companies? And I think this is where the differentiation very much matters. Both concepts have validity and both concepts are important, but we need to understand what we're talking about for this feeling of greenwashing and everybody's just trying to appear more sustainable than they are to fade away.
And you touched on that lightly, but I feel like a lot of companies, and I've definitely been in boardrooms where they're having these conversations, it feels like we're treating the topic as risk avoidance more than anything else. And you're seeing leaders, not bad people, but maybe they only really take note of, I'd say, the broader term of sustainability when then we get more maybe to the ESG side, which is they're trying to avoid a penalty, or they're trying to just follow basic compliance. But in your book, you're also challenging businesses to not just think about it as a risk, but to think about it as an opportunity. It's a big shift for leaders to do that. Can you help us walk through maybe what that would look like for a business and a leader?
I think what you're asking is a really important question, Lauren. Is this only about the risks or is there an upside? And our perspective is it's both. There's definitely something about managing the risks. Some of them are long-term risks, but many are short-term. So we need to manage them. And then there's something around seeing opportunities. And first of all, if we take a long-term perspective, the opportunities are huge, right? If we think about the infrastructures we will build, if we think about how we will address the energy transition, etc., there are huge, big long-term opportunities. But I think there are opportunities in the short term as well. I mean, I think there are definitely cost-related opportunities. There's definitely something happening on the consumer side. If we can choose, we have to choose things that actually are, more efficient or more responsible, etc. And there's definitely an opportunity on employees as well. And this is global. People want to work in companies that are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And in that regards, I think it's good for us to think about both. The managing the risks, that's the downside, and looking for the opportunities. And, many of the consulting firms, BCG is one, have looked at kind of what are the biggest sources of innovation today. And sustainability comes out on top. So it is a real great, super interesting source of new innovations. And maybe that's the way to think about it,
In the background of all of this, there's certainly a lot of, I think, polarization and perhaps even, well, actually, certainly politicization around maybe more the term ESG than possibly sustainability.
Yep.
But in doing your work and your research, did you see if there are any successful mechanisms with which we can almost reach across the aisle and show that this is an opportunity for all of us and it's not one versus the other?
Yeah, I like this question a lot, Lauren, because I think what you say is absolutely right. Oftentimes, it's more an allergy to the term, to these three letters, or even the term sustainability, where many feel it's woke or something that is unrelated to business, where in reality, it's at the heart of business. Because if we don't get access to resources, we don't have resilience business, then we have a problem, right? So, and this is something that most business leaders understand. So I think one tool that I like to use a lot is framing and reframing. Because I think it's very important that we stop coming and trying to push this agenda from our lens, which might be for some of us, and I could imagine that this is true for some of your listeners as well. We're very idealistic about this. We want to do better. We want to save the planet. But if we come with that agenda and try to have the same story and the same kind of ambition, motivation, and push that to everyone, we may not be heard. And I think this is where it's very important to start understanding what is it that my counterpart that I'm trying to convince, that I'm trying to get on board of this agenda, what are they worried about, right? If it's the CFO, how can we save costs? And sustainability, there are important cost savings. If I optimize resource use, there is an important cost saving in that, right? So if I'm talking about marketing, Knut already mentioned it, then there is a positioning issue, there's a differentiation issue. If I talk to R&D, there's innovation potential, and so on and so on. So I think we need to make a very conscious effort to make this topic more relatable to the worldview of the respective people that you're talking to. And I think oftentimes we're still living too much in our sustainability bubble. We think that everybody cares as much, and we think that everybody has as much knowledge as some of us have. And I think we just need to understand where is it that we can basically really relate it to the pain points, to the problems, and to the interests of our counterpart. And the topic is very thankful with this regard, because we can really almost find something in for everyone. But we need to make this conscious effort to say, instead of just saying, let's put some money in here to save the world, how could it benefit our business, right? How could it be an impetus for innovation? How can it help us to save costs? How can it help us to make the business more resilient? And so on and so on.
And many of our listeners are probably in that innovation space, in that they're working for businesses that are at the intersection of sustainability and technology. What kind of role do you think technology plays in all of this? Because on one hand, you have certain parties who are saying probably technology is going to be at the heart of finding solutions to address resiliency and sustainability. And then there are other groups who are valid in their claims that are saying, yes, but a lot of the solutions right now with technology, for example, generative AI, different mining practices, are putting so much pressure on our resources. So how do businesses hold these two truths at the same time? And is there a way to kind of move forward with that technology lens?
So at least my perspective is technology is going to be a major unlock on this one. And it's a little bit difficult to imagine it if we just think about the world as it is today, because then we become a little bit incremental in terms of, okay, we know what we have, we know how to pull the different levers, etc., but we don't know what we don't have. So another way to think about it is to just move far out and say, okay, we're 2100. Let's assume we have the energy transition in some way under control. We have developed much more circular business models. So in a way, we've done something. And then if we look back and ask ourselves, how did that happen? Well, it happened largely because of technology. AI, new renewables technologies, new ways of creating, efficient logistics, supply chain systems, etc. So my perspective is technology is a big positive lever. But short term, it of course also means huge use of energy, lots of focus on developing the new solutions, etc. But that's because we think of the world in very kind of incremental terms. On this, I am a big believer in stepping to the future and looking back and asking, how did all of this happen? Because it will. It will. We just don't know exactly how fast.
And maybe just to add to that, Lauren, I think it's somewhat a double-edged sword. So when you say some say that, some say that, I think both are right. There's some truth to both camps, but I think in the end, there's a question, and we see it with Microsoft and others, that their energy consumption went through the roof, right? 30% increase since we introduced generative AI. Water consumption, particularly in water-scarce areas, to cool down all these servers. It takes a massive environmental burden. There are big social questions that are unresolved, right? How many of these jobs will AI take? So there are very valid concerns when it comes to technology. I'm personally, like Knut, a big believer that technology can help us to achieve a lot of our sustainability, let's say, ambitions. It will help us to accelerate, but we should be mindful of the downside, and we should balance that much more carefully. And I think where I would be just more cautious is that oftentimes we have those that think that technology is a silver bullet. And this is where I think when we look at sustainability, we're talking about a very complex problem, and technology is somewhat of a linear solution. And this is what we often try then. Trying to solve a very complex problem with a linear solution means that basically we create a lot of side effects, negative side effects. And I think this is where we just need to be very mindful. Having said that, I'm very much a believer that it will help us to accelerate a lot of our sustainability goals, and it will be a key enabler. And a lot of the technological solutions that we need to achieve our sustainability goals are already there. So it's a question of how do we now really feed them into the systems? Because what it requires at the end of the day is more than just technology. Consumer changes, political changes, and so on. So for me, it's one part of the solution puzzle piece.